Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our 6th Get to Know Your State Forest webinar. And I'm really excited to learn more about Tioga State Forest today. My name is Sarah Corcoran. I am the Conservation Program Manager for the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club, and I will be your facilitator today. We are recording this presentation, so please make sure that you have your video off and your audio muted during our presentation. We'll have some time left over at the end of our presentation today, probably about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. During that time, I ask that you put any of your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I can read those off to our presenters, so that way we don't have to worry about folks coming on and off mute during that time frame. Your chat button is the little bubble at the bottom of your screen that says chat. If you would like to introduce yourself using the chat button, or if you have any questions throughout the presentation that you'd like to pop in before the Q&A session at the end, I can try my best to answer those or hold on to them to the end of the presentation. But with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Jim from Tioga State Forest to learn a little bit more about another one of our wonderful 20 forest district sites.
That must be me. Hello. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, so hopefully I won't have any glitches. Sarah assures me that I will not, and I have confidence. So I'm a DCNR forester. I am the district manager of the Tioga State Forest. I am a graduate of Penn State University. This is my 25th year as a forester for the Commonwealth. I started my career in South Williamsport, Lycoming County, the Tioga State Forest, when the Tioga State Forest office was there. And then I was for a few years a forest program specialist dealing with recreation issues, and that was in out of Harrisburg. And then I came here in 2018, give or take. I grew up in Schuylkill County in a little bitty coal mining town called Shenandoah. Some of you may have heard of that. But it's not the one in Virginia. It's the one in Pennsylvania. So what I'm going to do is give you an overview of our beloved Tioga State Forest. We have roughly 162,000 acres here. We are in Tioga, Bradford, Lycoming, and Potter counties, mostly in Tioga, and we just kind of graze Bradford, Lycoming, and Potter. I'm going to go into the history a little bit later, but our first land acquisition occurred about 1900, when many of the other land acquisitions occurred in that era, because the Commonwealth started to buy up old tracts of timber from logging companies, et cetera, et cetera. Our claim to fame is the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon. Here's looks like a foggy morning view of that. It is, I'd like to say it's world famous. It's not as famous as the Grand Canyon, but it is just as beautiful in its own way, in my mind. There's another view of it from Barber Rock in the wintertime, one of our many, many recreational trails that lead to vistas in the Tioga State Forest. And we are located here. If you can see my cursor swirling around, we are one of 20 forest districts in the state, and we are one of the most beautiful and attended and highly recreated districts in the state. Our facilities I'm talking to you here from underneath this brown roof in our district office in Wellsboro. We also have two maintenance headquarters. One is in Ansonia, near the top of the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon. The other is in Armenia, in our forest districts near Blossburg. We have 40 staff, give or take. Most of those are work year-round, and we have a small percentage that work seasonally as well. They basically are off work about November, Thanksgiving, and they come back to work just about now in March. And so we are located here where my cursor is. This is the Tioga State Forest to our west, this being the Pine Creek Natural Area. And that would be the portion of our forest that the Ansonia Maintenance Division takes care of, including the 30 miles or so that we maintain of the Pine Creek Rail Trail. And then the other folks out of Armenia manage all this country out here. And that is more widely dispersed, and it has all sorts of things going on, from waterfalls to mine acid drainage treatment plants, and Mid-State Trail goes through that. It's rather pretty there at Sand Run Falls. What we do. So if I'm ever with a bunch of people I don't know, and people are trading back and forth what they do for a living, and I say I'm a forester, people are like, well, what's there to do? What can you possibly do all day? But just there's so much. I'm always taken back by that question. We have a very strong timber management program here. We have 7 full-time degreed foresters who work on our timber management program. We have a very strong oil and gas program. We have tons of forest regeneration projects going on, including on some of the mine acid drainage, mine spoil lands. We deal with all sorts of pest management issues, invasive species control. Invasive species are things like Japanese knotweed and multiflora rose and dozens of other plants that find their way to our forest. And we deal, of course, with recreation. We do help manage half of the 62-mile rail trail, and we have hundreds of right-of-ways across private land and private right-of-ways across us. And we have over 100 leased camps. You guys might know them as hunting camps. And we have various campgrounds, and we have over 200 miles of dirt and gravel roads to maintain, along with stream improvements, and we even help people take care of their private lands with the service forester position here. And then we have law enforcement, and then we have prescribed fires, and then we have our Smoky program, and then we have people getting lost all the time, and so we have to go out and find them with our search and rescue program. And there's more. We are considered a multiple use, for the most part, a multiple use resource. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later, how we arrived at that strategy. But that's our largest land strategy, and that land management strategy. And timber, water, recreation, flora and fauna, minerals. We do care a lot about our aesthetics, and we have buffers that buffer not so much visually attractive management practices, buffer those away from people, where people are recreating, and so forth and so on. We do have several wild and natural areas where management is restricted or not permitted at all. The Pine Creek Gorge is one example of a natural area, and the Black Ash Swamp. You might be familiar with the Algerine Swamp in District 12 in Lycoming County, and the adjacent Reynolds Spring. And then we have our ASIP wild area. The forest types we have in our 160,000 acres. You can see there 32% northern hardwood. That's kind of it's a forest type that grows in glaciated lands, and it will include black cherry, red, and sugar maple. That gives us our very strong maple syrup industry up here. It also includes birches and ash and beech and a few other species. And we have about 7% for you grouse hunters. We have aspen and gray and paper birch stands that we manage. We have a strong ruffed grouse management program, and so we are glad to have that aspen. And we have some in the southern parts of the district, some red oak and mixed hardwood stands, a little hickory mixed in there, and some other things. Then we have dry oak heath. That would be considered our, I call that our high and dry sites. That's the mountain laurel and chestnut oak and places like that where deer like to hide. And then some other terrestrial forest types mixed in there, and a little bit different types of white oak and other oaks in the southern part of the district. So our focus is on regenerating the forest. We don't, and actually are not permitted to harvest any portion of the forest unless the regeneration already exists on the ground, and we are sticklers about that. And so we have various techniques through the art and science called silviculture, where we make sure that we have, if not artificially, naturally brought a sustainable stand of a future sustainable stand of young seedlings and saplings into the site by various strategies. One of those strategies we might use is called a shelter wood, and that would be where we take advantage of the best genetics in the forest. We leave the biggest and the best trees and thin out the rest, and then which increases the amount of light on the forest floor. And those trees are the mother trees for the new regenerating forest. And once the new regenerating forest is established, then we have those genetics in place, and then we can remove the overstory, the trees that had remained. And of course, we'll always leave some large trees. But we strive for biological diversity. And with that, we do have stands of old growth, and we do what you would call clear-cut aspen stands, because aspen is clonal, and that's how it comes back. It comes back to us if you clear-cut it. And that creates great wildlife habitat. So for overstory removal and shelterwood, we about 877 acres is what we manage, and that produces an average of 7.2 million board feet. A board foot, if you're not familiar with that, is a unit of measure in forestry. It's basically a board that's 12 inches wide, 12 inches long, and an inch thick, for about 144 cubic feet of wood. So imagine that we manage about 7.2 million of those every year, just in that one category, for a total at the bottom of 8.7 million board feet. You see, this is an age class distribution. You can see in the middle there, 101 to 120 is by and large the most dominant age class of trees in our forest. About 100 years ago, most of the forests in north central Pennsylvania were clear cut by logging companies, and then after that we acquired the lands and began managing them responsibly, and a lot of that's left. And we have some critters coming after us all the time. All the time somebody wants to eat our trees. Forest tent caterpillar, frost cycles that are ever changing in our climate change. I don't know if it's hard to say what climate change is going to do, and but it has caused late and early frosts and unexpected things, and along with that, drought. And there you see the sponge moth. We've had to change the name of the gypsy moth recently because well, I guess somebody was offended. The sponge moth, sponge refers to the egg masses of the formerly known as gypsy moths are kind of spongy to the touch. So that became, we call it the sponge moth. We didn't come up with that name. Whoever insect, I don't know, whoever names insects came up with that. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. An entomologist on high somewhere. And we work to regenerate all the stands that are impacted by all these critters, and about 10,000 acres now impacted by those things. And we've lost almost every ash in the district. It's about 2,500 acres. We've had to salvage a lot of it that we could. And we do still collect seed, and we do still treat about 100 trees on 6 different sites, those sites being aesthetically or recreationally important, like the ASIF or for example, the Tioga camping area, and along the rail trail and things like that. We do the same thing for hemlock that's being ravaged by hemlock woolly adelgid as well. We do manage for oil and gas, and we have 4 different lessees on 10 different tracks for about 45,000 acres leased. Included in that is 31 well pads and 116 wells drilled. We are, the price of natural gas is increasing. And so we are watching the geopolitical climate very closely, because that will have impacts on our state forest. Recreation is, even since COVID, has become more and more widespread and an important use of the forest. The recreation is really the catalyst between people who are not aware of anything that happens in the logging industry or having to do with natural resources at all. Recreation is the catalyst. And we do have 247 miles of hiking trails that are designated, and 444 or more miles of hiking trails. Lots of trails aren't marked or maintained. And that would be impossible for us to do that. But we have mapped out about 247 acres or miles. And we do have mountain biking, 22 miles designated, and horseback riding, 20 miles designated. And that's mostly along the Pine Creek Rail Trail. We have lots of camping. We have pay camping at ASIF and County Bridge. Lots of backpacking opportunities in the backcountry along our West Rim Trail and Midstate Trail and others. We have quite a few beautiful picnic areas, and we are a magnet for hunters and fishermen, and past couple seasons for snowmobilers. We've finally gotten some good snow, and we're able to groom throughout the grooming season, and people come from all over the state to run their machines on us. So I'd like to back up a couple hundred years, well, maybe like 500 years here, and just go through briefly how we got here. And this, I think this few slides will help you understand how we arrived at our management strategies, so forth and so on. So this guy here, of course, is William Penn. He was born about 1640. I think he was given all the Pennsylvania roughly by his father, who was given the land. If I remember right, he was given the land by the king for service in the Navy, British Navy. I think he was an admiral. But anyway, young William ended up with it, and at the time, I think he was the largest landowner in the world, or one of them. And this is what the Pennsylvania looked like, and which is it's great because I took this picture just a few years ago, looking west from the Black Forest region, and a lot of it still looks like that. They said, you know, the cliche is a squirrel could have started at the Jersey Shore and went all the way to the Mississippi without touching the ground. Well, that's still true in some of our north central counties. And the first inhabitants here, the ones that theoretically came across the land bridge or whatever in the Bering Sea, may have looked like this. Of course, they didn't have rifles. They would have had rifles later after trading and with various Europeans. And I imagine the original people wading across Pine Creek might have looked something like this. Of course, William Penn was pretty sure that he owned all this land, and the natives, they definitely owned all the land. And so there's some friction going on. And so William Penn and his band of merry men came up with all sorts of treaties, and I don't know if you could call them tricky, but the natives weren't used to that kind of call it horse trading, but it wasn't horse trading, it was land trading. And eventually they were pushed to the west. But the one such trade or land deal was the land trail of 1700, in whereby William Penn received from the Indians most of the land on either side of the Susquehanna up to the Great Lakes and down to the Chesapeake Bay, including all the minerals and fishings and hawkings and huntings and fowlings and royalties and profits and commodities, it says there. And for that, he traded the Native Americans this parcel of English goods, and that included everything you see there. And 25 gallons of rum was handy to have. 2,000 needles. You could see it was basically just a truckload of junk that would have been an amazing payment for Native Americans, but then of course all those things are not lasting. They all disappeared, and then the natives didn't have their land anymore. So the Europeans started to infiltrate. First Europeans may have looked like this, with a big old bear trap on their shoulder. And the first settlers to the Pine Creek region would have been, are said to have come through, if you could see this over here, this was in a Philadelphia newspaper about 1803. It invited people, there were investors from England inviting people to come to this what would be Tioga County woodlands, over 120,000 acres they claimed to have control over, and they invited people to live up here. And some of the people that came here were Mr. Wells, Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Morris, et cetera, et cetera. And they found that the trees, the forest in this new English settlement were a lot like this. They thought maybe they'd be able to farm and scratch out a living on this land, but that was not to be done. And they moved on, and the Wells moved up to Wellsboro and founded Wellsboro, and Benjamin Morris, well, I suppose Morris is named after him, and Enoch Blackwell moved down to Pine Creek, and that's where he lived, where Blackwell is now. But the original cabins in the backcountry might have looked something like this. Then came the white pine era. Of course, we had the very large, tall, native white pine trees in this region. The forests were just full of them, and they were very valuable in the British shipping industry. And so that era brought Europeans here to harvest those trees and to float them down the river to shipping industry in the lower Susquehanna. So trees were a great commodity back then. They appear on our early coins with the pine tree shilling and those sort of things, and they appear on all the maps. In Europe at that time, and England especially, the trees had all been cut down centuries earlier. And to see so many trees standing was just phenomenal find for the Europeans. Of course, we had to come over here and start cutting them ourselves. The supply was endless. And we organized logging camps up in a lot of our hollows in the Tioga State Forest in the wintertime. We employed thousands of men removing the logs. And we slid them down these ice-covered log slides that we created with other trees that we cut down. And we built dams, and we dammed up our creeks in the bottom of the hollows. And in the spring of the year, when the flow was strong, we filled these ponds with logs and then dynamited them so the logs could flow downstream and hit Pine Creek, where they could go to the Susquehanna. And some little mills popped up, even water operated mills, but mostly they were steam operated. And they eventually arrived at, this is in Waterville, by the way, Lycoming County. They eventually arrived at the idea to make big logs or big timbers out of the trees and raft them in or lash them into these big rafts, and even have people living on them and take them down to the Susquehanna and then down on to the shipping industry, where they were dismantled and sold for their content, and then the wood hicks or river rats, or whatever you would call the people who went on those rafts, they walked back to Williamsport and did it all again. A lot of stories say they spent all their money in the taverns, so I don't know if that's true or not. But then the railroad was invented, and then that was the last straw for our timber in Pennsylvania. Every last inch of it was taken. This grade here would become the Black Forest Trail, just to the west of Slate Run. And this was also taken in Slate Run. Take note of the denuded hillside above. This photo would have been taken where, kind of like where Wolf's Store is right now, looking west up into the Slate Run drainage. There's no trees left up there. There's some pines or something I can see in one of the really, really steep areas, but for the most part, every tree was cut. And the creeks were filled with all sorts of sludge and bark, and there was a hat factory in Slate Run at that time that used mercury to make hats, and that went into the creek, and all the sewage from the houses went into the creek, and man, it was a mess. And the country was heading in the wrong direction as far as conservation goes. Along comes this guy, this brash guy, Teddy Roosevelt, who had a strong ethic for natural resources. And he meets up with this guy, John MUIR, who was the founder of the Sierra Club. And the two sort of had a chemistry. And if I can, I think I have time to play a tiny little video here. And this is a very important moment in the history of conservation in the United States. And I like to play it for people because, well, you'll see if I can get it to go.
An influential man from Washington wants to make a trip into the Sierra with me, and I might be able to do some forest good in freely talking around the campfire.
It was the president, still working his way up through California, asking MUIR to accompany him during a visit to Yosemite. "I do not want anyone with me but you," Roosevelt had written. "I want to drop politics absolutely and just be out in the open with you." MUIR realized this was the opportunity of a lifetime. He purchased a brand new woolen suit for the occasion and hurried to join the presidential entourage. On May 15th, they set off for the Mariposa Grove of big trees in a flurry of activity. A long caravan of wagons filled with staff and dignitaries, a detachment of 30 Buffalo soldiers riding along as escorts. MUIR soon found himself seated in the president's coach, along with the governor of California, the secretary of the Navy, the Surgeon General, 2 college presidents, and Roosevelt's personal secretary. It was hardly the trip he had been promised, but MUIR tried his best to squeeze in words to the president and governor about the issue of making all of Yosemite a national park. In the grove of mighty sequoias, the president's group paused, as all tourists did, for a snapshot at the famous Wawona tunnel tree. And later, they posed for an official photograph, lined up along the base of the grizzly giant, the oldest and most famous sequoia in Yosemite, estimated to be 2,700 years old and boasting a single branch that was 6.5 feet in diameter. Then the troops, the phalanx of reporters and photographers, and virtually all of the official party headed back to the Wawona Hotel, where a series of receptions and a grand dinner were scheduled in the president's honor that evening. None of them knew that Roosevelt had no intention of attending. Instead, he remained behind with only John MUIR and a few park employees who started preparing a camp at the base of one of the sequoias, part of a secret plan Roosevelt had hatched to allow him time alone with the trees and the man who considered them sacred. They built a fire and sat around it, eating a simple supper, talking as twilight enveloped them, getting to know one another in the glow of the blaze.
The night was clear, and in the darkening aisles of the great sequoia grove, the majestic trunks, beautiful in color and symmetry, rose round us like the pillars of a mightier cathedral than ever was conceived even by the fervor of the Middle Ages. Hermit thrushes sang beautifully in the evening.
And MUIR said, "I fell in love with this Theodore Roosevelt." He actually used those words. "You can't resist this man. I fell in love with him." Roosevelt, interestingly enough, came back and complained a little bit about MUIR and said he doesn't know his bird songs. Roosevelt's an ornithologist. He knows everything there is to know about birds. But MUIR also got one off on Roosevelt. He said to him, "Mr. President, when are you going to get over this infantile need you have to kill animals?" Roosevelt would not have taken that from any other human being.
I had a perfectly glorious time with the president and the mountains. I never before had a more interesting, hearty, and manly companion. I stuffed him pretty well regarding the timber thieves and other spoilers of the forest.
Long after sundown, with no tent and only a pile of army blankets, the 2 men finally went to sleep. The next morning at 6:30, they saddled up for the long ride to Yosemite Valley, with the guide under strict orders from the president to avoid at all costs the Wawona Hotel and the delegation of officials he had jilted the night before. In the high country near Glacier Point, with its spectacular panorama of the valley and its waterfalls arrayed at their feet, they stopped and once more made camp at a spot their guide, Charlie Leidig, had picked out.
Around the campfire, Roosevelt and MUIR talked far into the night regarding MUIR's glacial theory of the formation of Yosemite Valley. They also talked a great deal about the protection of forests in general and Yosemite in particular. I heard them discussing the setting aside of other areas in the United States for park purposes. There was some difficulty in their campfire conversation because both men wanted to do the talking.
They awoke the next morning, covered by a light snow that had fallen in the high country during the night. Rather than feeling inconvenienced, the president couldn't have been more delighted. "We slept in a snowstorm last night," he exclaimed to the crowds that had been patiently waiting for him on the valley floor. "This," he said, "has been the grandest day of my life."
So can you hear me okay, Sarah?
I can hear you, and I just wanted to do a time check.
Yep,
It's,
22.
all right.
Alrighty, so yeah, for Roosevelt to say that that was the grandest day of his life was a lot. I mean, he was a wealthy person and must have had a lot of grand days. But that was one of the turning points to natural resources conservation in the United States. And back here on the home front, we had Gifford Pinchot, who was the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, and he was governor in Pennsylvania and a forester. And he thought that natural resources should be managed for the greatest good for the greatest amount of time. And he came up with our strategy originally. And it was a 3-tiered management strategy, and that we would manage our forests with 3 important considerations: environmental, economic, and social. Environmental being the clean water, clean air, and wildlife, and all those things that encompass an ecosystem. And the economics being the raw materials that the forest presents to us, the jobs, and then social, the aesthetics that we gain from the forest, the hunting and the fishing and the recreation. All of those 3 managed equally, not with not having one any more important than the other. And we still do that today. And Joseph Rothrock, he was our first commissioner of forestry, the first head of the organization I now work for. And he too was a visionary, and he started buying up all these lands that would become our state forest land. And he started training forest managers, and down at Mont Alto, a subsidiary of Penn State University. It would become a branch campus, and he started enacting campfire laws, and he set up the original leased hunting camp program, so forth and so on. And so our natural resources that were once completely denuded and abandoned had an opportunity to come back. And here's some old pictures. Here's the one-handed fly fisherman from Camel, PA. I often wondered how he was able to do that. And then by the 1930s, well, before that, the deer population had been market hunted almost to extinction. And we started to bring in deer from Wisconsin, and the Game Commission began in full force to bring back the deer population. And then because the forest was so young and brushy, the deer population just exploded, and came the days of yore of deer hunting in north central Pennsylvania, where a lot of older people kind of get their impressions of what deer hunting should be like. And then we had the bears. Bears were largely extinct as well, and they began to come back, and we eventually brought back fishers and otters and those things that were trapped out. And no, we didn't bring back any mountain lions, even though I'm sure some of you have seen them. We did not bring those back. Although there's some pretty good accounts from the early days of the railroad of mountain lions in the Pine Creek Valley. And the water sports were gaining momentum, like here at the bathing beach in Williamsport. You can see all the canoes, and that sport was kind of taken off. And bicycles were invented sometime there in the late 1800s, and they became affordable. And they even came up with a way to ride them on the railroad. And I mentioned our lease camp program. All these vast forests in north central Pennsylvania, the governor wanted a way to get the people up into these areas, and so that they could use them, enjoy them recreationally, and came up with that about 1913 or so, the State Forest Lease Camp program. And then came the CCC camps. We had 5 of them in the Tioga State Forest, where hundreds and hundreds of boys from around the world came here and worked on conservation projects. But then that was 1933. But then in 1941, December 7th, Pearl Harbor was attacked. And thankfully, a lot of those boys had military training now, military-like training, and they went to war, and they helped us in our victory. Now, one important little, it's fun, a fun little picture I like to share with people. See, this is at the ASIF CCC camp. See the fellow I'm circling here? His name is Nick Russin. He was a cook at the ASIF CCC camp. Here he is again on the shore of Normandy, D-Day, after his amphibious boat was sunk by a German shell. He's being pulled out of the surf there. Same guy, pretty neat, from Cottersport. And those people that came back from the war, the 10th Mountain Division guys had a lot of experience in cross-country skiing. And so we started to develop cross-country ski trails, and snowmobiles were invented back in the day. And people started to have more free time, and we started opening up our hiking trails and building bridges. And today, our beautiful Tioga State Forest is reforested and laced with recreational opportunities. The wildlife that was mostly formerly threatened has come back. The wildflowers like this spring beauty, and the algerine swamp, and the sundews, all those precious little rare plants that live in the swamp, went from, this is a picture from Leonard Harrison about the turn of the 20th century. You could see there are no trees in the Pine Creek Valley, and you could see how all the trees were taken out. But now we are sustainably harvesting those forests, and the trees are still being utilized, but they are sustainable and they are growing back. And we are repairing the streams with various conservation projects. This is Bab Creek. We have almost completely cleaned that up from the mine acid drainage of where the mining started in the 1830s in Blossburg and Arnott. And we are doing lots of wildlife projects and tree planting projects. We plant tens of thousands of trees, and we grow tens of thousands more by collecting seeds and sending them to our Penn nursery in Center County, and they grow seedlings for us to put back in the forest land. We also manage our forests with fire. We have prescribed fire, and we do try our best to prevent wildfire with our smoky programs. We have a service forester. That's our old Steve Hoover. He retired, unfortunately, and he just loved forestry, and he taught thousands of people about it over his career. And we have our Pine Creek Rail Trail, and people just love our rail trail. It was voted one of the top 5 in the world, actually, and we are proud to maintain it. Because again, it is that catalyst between the public and the forest resource. We also do a lot of snowmobiling, motorized sports. We are actually we're opening up a little bit of our state forest roads to ATVs this year. And we have our Pine Creek Water Trail that people just absolutely love to. If you've never done it, it's one of the most amazing experiences. And it's completely free, and it's safe, and it's mostly safe, and it's just wonderful. And we set tracks on almost 60 miles of the Pine Creek Rail Trail, Nordic ski tracks. That's my wife there down near Rattlesnake rock, enjoying the bright sunshine and the beautiful ski conditions. And we even manage a road rally on some of our roads here in the Tioga State Forest. We try our best to accommodate this commercially important event every year. And we try our best to introduce diversity into our employment. And although I don't know anybody who could pick up a deer like that, so that's really something. And we are strongly tied to the Game Commission and our hunting program. We have 4 DMAP areas, and we manage for deer populations year round. And of course, we have our West Rim Trail that backpackers from all over the state come to every year and enjoy the beautiful woodlands and scenic vistas along the way. Our fishing is second to none along Pine Creek and other creeks. Our deer population is booming if you can find where they're hiding. And our waters are clean, no longer polluted. And our kids are getting strong out in the forest and enjoying the natural resources. Our black bears are big and fat here, and our snakes are numerous. Our milk snakes, and we don't really have any copperheads. I will say that we do not have those here. Maybe you beg to differ, but we do have tons of rattlesnakes, as you may know, yellow ones and black ones and baby ones, all mixed together. And now here's our little owl asking if you have any questions. Looks like I have 10 minutes or more left.
Absolutely. So as I said in the beginning of the presentation today, if you have any questions for Jim, can you please pop them in the chat? I will read them off so we don't have to worry about folks coming on and off mute. We did have a few questions come in during your presentation, Jim, so I'll start with those. And we were scheduled to end our presentation at 1 o'clock today, but Jim has said that he can stay a little bit longer to answer any additional questions. So if you have to leave right at 1, that's understandable. I'll be sharing out the recording with everyone who registered. And if you have any additional questions that you think of after our presentation today, you can reach out to myself or Jim, and we would be happy to answer anything via email. Or you could call the district office, sure that you would love to chat. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and start reading off some of the questions. The first one was, so you spoke about ash mortality and some of the issues having to deal with ash death within the forest, but there was a question asking about Douglas fir and if any diseases have been impacting the fir populations within the forest.
So Douglas fir is an important commercial tree species. It's native to the western United States. It's not native to Pennsylvania, and so it would be considered an agricultural tree and would be beyond our normal our management duties. Other than some drought issues and weather-related issues and deer-related issues that love to rub their antlers on them, I do not have any more information on insects or diseases affecting Douglas fir, unfortunately. But I can certainly, if I gave me some time, I could find that out if you gave me a call back.
All right, thank you. The next one, it seems to be like a 3 or 4 part question, so I'll read them off one at a time, and you can answer with however you have the information for. So the first one was asking about the average number of years between seeking and timber harvest for hardwood.
Between seeding and harvest?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're depending on the species that we're harvesting, for example, oak becomes marketable at anywhere between 70 and 100 years, depending on the growing conditions.
All right.
And for white pine, they can grow several hundred years. Hemlocks can be 500 years old, but the pine and the hemlock, they don't have the commercial value that our oaks would have. And the hickories would be about the same as the oaks, and birches or aspen are short-lived, with them falling out of the stand at 30, 40 years possibly, and birches somewhere in between there.
The next question, which is semi-related, is does the forest manage specifically for more black cherry populations?
Whenever we harvest a northern hardwoods stand with black cherry, we try our darndest to get the black cherry to regenerate. A lot of times, beyond our knowledge, beyond lots of people studying the problem's knowledge, the black cherry is having a hard time regenerating. We don't know if it's related to acidic rain or climate change or what it is, but we are able to regenerate a lot of our black cherry stands, but we do have trouble regenerating it, and a lot of times it does become black birch or red maple. But yes, we are trying, and people are studying it, and we revere the quality of our cherry stands, and the natural qualities, the benefit to the ecosystem that a mass crop tree like black cherry brings to our ecosystems.
The next question is two-part. Going off of your mention of opening some of the state forest roads to ATV usage, he was wondering how the current pilot programs affected the forest, and if there's been much of an increase in like ATV trespass.
We had maybe 3 instances of ATV trespass near Colton Point State Park. We, by design, are allowing ATVs only on a limited number right now, 2 for last season, state forest roads. And the majority of the riding, the pilot program, is designed to connect township roads that are already open to ATVs with the limited number of roads that are open on state forest land, with the exception being Susquehannock State Forest that has their own ATV trail network on some closed roads that are closed to other vehicles. But in the Tioga State Forest, we may be opening a few in our northern division above Route 6, but those roads will not be specific to ATV use. They will be roads that are already open to motor vehicles, and there will be no damage to their resource.
Okay, the next question we have is referencing cross-country ski trails, and they want to know if you have any maps that you recommend for cross-country ski trails in the area.
Yes, if you come over to the office here or go online, you'll find some cross-country ski trail maps. I mentioned the 10th Mountain Division. So there's a series of trails up along Route 44 near a region we call the Black Forest that were created by ex-district forester named Francis X. Kennedy. He was in the 10th Mountain Division in Italy, learned to ski and brought that back here, and then opened up a lot of those trails in the 1950s. Here in Tioga, we have the Pine Creek Rail Trail, which is great for beginner skiing, and we have the Sand Run Falls skiing circuit area, and we have another one called the Bee Tree Ski Trail that is just below ASIF, and we do have maps for those, yes.
We have two questions relating to camping within the forest. One is asking if there's any dispersed camping areas in the forest, and another individual was asking how you would go about leasing one of the campsites.
So the camping question, you can camp as long as you obey the rules and regulations. You can camp wherever you want in the backcountry without a permit. We have certain regulations that come in during fire season. We prohibit fires, but if, for example, if you wanted to hike the West Rim Trail through the district, you could camp one night at any one of the campsites you find without permit and for free. We have very liberal camping policies, except along Pine Creek, and that's because we just so many people use that area that we have to employ some various regulations there. And what was that second question?
It was a question about how would you go about leasing one of the camps within the district?
Oh, so yeah, that I get that question a lot. So that program was started in the early 1900s, and those camps have been either passed from family member to family member through the years, or when they're sold, go through a realtor, and they're put on the commercial market. We have nothing to do with the sale of those. All we do is administer the lease. The camps are placed on quarter-acre leases, and we own the land underneath, and the folks who have the lease own the cabin that's on the lease, and we have nothing to do with the transfer of that cabin property, just the transfer of the leased land.
I know something similar happens at Promised Land State Park. There's a lot of old leased camp buildings there because I'm pretty close to Promised Land.
They have a lot of those in that district.
The next question is referring to deer hunting. They were wondering what DMAPs are.
DMAP is an acronym for Deer Management Assistance Program. So our foresters survey the forest every year. They have scientific plots where they study deer browse and various factors that allow us to determine the number of deer in an area. And by the data that they obtain on those surveys, we are, through the Game Commission, allowed to give out deer hunting permits or tags in addition to what the Game Commission normally allocates. So if we have a heavy deer population somewhere, we might have 1,000 or so tags in addition to what the Game Commission offers. And you could buy those on the Game Commission website and use them just like you would any other deer tag.
So the next question is actually also deer related. They were asking about if you have any issues with invasive shrubs within the forest district, and also we're asking how you protect tree saplings and other undergrowth from deer.
So we have a lot of invasive species, from garlic mustard to Japanese knotweed. Depending where you are, you will find invasive species. That's not just true of our forest, it's true of all the forests, and it's true of the United States in general. Species arrive here any number of ways, from Asia on shipping containers or you name it. It gets here, and the species, whether they're plant or animal, have no native enemies like they have evolved within their home range, and so they kind of run rampant here. And yes, we have lots of them, and they are very difficult to eradicate. And as far as deer eating our trees, when we do a timber sale, of course, we want the forest to regenerate, and deer love to eat young trees. And so what we do, is build deer exposure fences, whereby if we have a 70-acre timber sale that we want to protect the new seedlings in, we will fence that entire 70 acres and keep deer out of that area until they reach a height above the deer about 10 feet, and that takes anywhere from 4 to 10 years.
The next question was asking if it's permissible to harvest deadfall wood within the district.
It is. We have a $20 camping permit fee, and you can cut the firewood, a cord of dead or down firewood, and load up your pickup truck, and it's only 20 bucks a cord. So the answer is yes, but you got to come in here and you got to tell us where you're going to cut, and we'll give you permission, because it's not a willy-nilly program. We have certain areas that we don't want anything cut in, if there's a timber sale being planned there or whatnot.
20 bucks a cord is a good price.
Yeah.
Let's see, what's the next question we have? So the next question was wondering if oak is particularly hard to regenerate.
Oak is not as hard as cherry, but so an oak tree, depending on the species, has a bumper crop of acorns every 4 to 6 years, and timing those timber sales with those bumper crops is great. And of course, blue jays and squirrels help us germinate those acorns, and fire, we use prescribed fire to help us eliminate birch and maple in beech. In a forest stand, oaks really respond well to prescribed fire, because they put the majority of their energy into their root system before they put energy into the stem above the ground. And so that's the opposite of what the other tree species do. So a quick little fire across the surface will really let the oak take dominance in a stand. And we have all different silvicultural procedures that help us to enhance oak regeneration.
We have one last question in the chat, and it was asking if there's any areas for RV camping within the district.
Well, we don't have the space typically to accommodate large ATVs, but we do at ASIF and County Bridge, 2 of our organized campsites, we do have areas large enough for, say, a pop-up camper. And so that would be about it. The state park system, our sister agency, the Bureau of State Parks, is better equipped for RV camping. Well, most of our camping, or all of our camping, is considered primitive, and if there's typically no running water, we typically have pit toilets, and there's no hookups for RVs.
All right, so thanks, Jim. That's all the questions we have right now. Like I said earlier, if anyone thinks of any other questions that you might have for either myself or for Jim, please feel free to reach out via email. I will be sharing out a copy of the recording with all of the registered participants. Jim, it's okay for me to share your contact information?
Absolutely.
All right, so I will share that out as well. And then I have one last question before we pop off. Do you have a recreation forester within the district? And what's the best way for folks who may want to volunteer their time within Tioga State Forest?
Yes, we do have a recreation forester. His name is Tom Oliver. And so just go online and apply to be a conservation volunteer on the DCNR website. And that email will be shared with Tom Oliver, and you can talk to him on the phone or come in person, and he'll set you up with some ideas if you'd like to, who knows what, clean out campfire rings in the back country, you could do that. Or if you wanted to do something in the front country, you could do that as well. If you want to cut knotweed with the scissors, you could do that if you want. We're open. We need lots of help. So yeah, whatever you'd like.
All right, so that's it for us today. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope that you can get out and enjoy the rest of this spring weather today. Have a good one.